She bought an injured wolf for $1, then woke to find the Alphaking sleeping beside her.
What would you do if a single silver dollar the price of a stale loaf of bread bought you the most dangerous creature in the kingdom? Maeve thought she was saving a dying beast from a cruel fighting pit. She never expected to wake up next to the bloodthirsty Alphaking. The medieval trading outpost of Oakhaven was a miserable stretch of mud and rot, particularly during the autumn rains. Nestled near the jagged borders of the Iron Valley, it was a place where desperate people came to make desperate deals. Maeve Hastings stood at the edge of the sprawling market, the heavy wool of her cloak pulled tight against the biting wind. She was an apothecary by trade, a woman forced into the shadows of society after her father's untimely death left her drowning in debts to the local magistrate, Lord Harrington. On this particular Tuesday, the market square was louder than usual. A crowd had gathered around a rusted, heavy iron wagon belonging to Caelan Briggs, a notorious poacher and beast trapper whose cruelty was legendary across the northern reaches. Step up and behold." Briggs roared, pacing in the mud before a massive cage forged of thick iron bars. "Caught this monster trespassing near the royal borders. It's got the size of a bear and the temperament of a demon. But look at the coat on it. Midnight black. I'm skinning it at sundown. The pelt goes to the highest bidder." Maeve didn't want to look. She despised the brutality of the trappers. But as she turned to leave, a low, rumbling growl vibrated through the muddy ground, resonating in the very marrow of her bones. She paused, glancing over her shoulder. Inside the cramped cage lay a wolf of impossible proportions. It was easily the size of a warhorse, its fur matted with dark, thick blood. Thick chains were bolted to the floor, and a cruel, jagged collar forged of pure silver dug deep into the creature's neck. The silver was burning the beast. Maeve could see the faint, sickly smoke rising from its flesh where the metal made contact. It was a slow, agonizing execution. Yet, it was not the creature's size or its wounds that rooted Maeve to the spot. It was its eyes. The wolf lifted its heavy, battered head, and its gaze locked onto hers. The eyes were a piercing, luminescent gold, swirling with an intelligence and a profound, silent agony that stole the breath from her lungs. This was no mindless beast. There was pride in that gaze. There was a soul. Before she could stop herself, Maeve pushed through the throng of jeering merchants and drunkards. "Wait," she called out, her voice cutting through the noise. Briggs paused, spitting a wad of tobacco into the mud. He eyed her threadbare cloak and sneered. "Well, well, the disgraced apothecary. What do you want, Hastings? Come to beg for scraps?" "I want the wolf," Maeve said, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't know why she was doing this. She barely had enough to survive the winter. The crowd erupted into laughter. Briggs wiped his mouth, amused. You want the beast? It's dying, girl. The silver's already in its blood. Besides, this pelt is worth 50 gold pieces to Lord Harrington himself. What could you possibly offer me?" Maeve reached into the deep pocket of her cloak. Her fingers brushed past a few useless copper pennies until they found the heavy, cold metal of her last true currency. It was a rare, old-world silver dollar, a relic from the fallen dynasty, but still recognized as legal tender. It was meant to buy her rations and firewood for the month. She pulled it out and held it up. The silver coin caught the bleak gray light of the stormy sky. $1, Maeve said firmly. Briggs laughed harshly. "A single dollar? For the terror of the Iron Valley? Are you mad?" "It's dying," Maeve retorted, stepping closer to the cage, ignoring the way the beast tracked her every movement. "Look at it. It's breathing its last. If it dies in the cage before sundown, the silver rot will taint the pelt. You know the old tanning laws, Briggs. A pelt tainted by silver sickness sheds its fur in a week. It will be worthless. Take my dollar, and you don't have to clean the rot out of your wagon." Briggs narrowed his eyes, examining the wolf. The beast did indeed look like it was on its final breath, its chest barely rising. The trapper was a greedy man, but he was also lazy. The thought of dragging a rotting massive carcass into the skinning sheds was unappealing. $1, Briggs muttered, snatching the coin from her hand with surprising speed. Fine. It's your funeral, Hastings. When it wakes up and tears your throat out, don't come crying to me. You have 10 minutes to get it off my wagon. Getting the massive creature to her secluded cabin on the edge of the Whispering Woods was a Herculean task. She had to hire a local stable boy with the promise of future medical salves just to use a heavy timber cart. The wolf remained motionless the entire journey, its breathing shallow and erratic. When they finally managed to roll the beast onto the thick, woven rug before Maeve's stone hearth, the boy fled into the rain, terrified. Alone in the dim light of her cabin, Maeve sank to her knees beside the creature. Up close, the damage was horrifying. The silver collar had singed the fur away completely, biting into raw muscle. "I'm going to take this off," Maeve whispered, extending a trembling hand. "Please don't bite me." The wolf's golden eyes flickered open. It watched her, utterly still. Wrapping her hands in a thick leather apron to protect herself from the cursed metal, Maeve grabbed the heavy clasp of the collar. It took all her strength, her knuckles turning white, but with a sharp crack, the locking mechanism gave way. She threw the heavy silver collar across the room, where it clattered harmlessly against the stone wall. The wolf let out a deep, shuddering exhale, and its eyes rolled back as it finally lost consciousness. For the next 5 hours, Maeve worked tirelessly. She boiled water, mixed poultices of comfrey, crushed garlic, and sweet briar, carefully avoiding wolfsbane or anything toxic to beasts. She cleaned the deep lacerations, packed the wounds with the healing paste, and bound them in clean linen. By the time she finished, the fire had burned down to glowing embers, and a violent thunderstorm was raging outside, rattling the heavy wooden shutters. Exhausted, shivering, and covered in dried blood and mud, Maeve grabbed a woolen blanket, curled up on the floor just a few feet from the massive black wolf, and immediately fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The storm worsened near midnight. A deafening crack of thunder shook the foundations of the small cabin, but it wasn't the noise that pulled Maeve from her slumber. It was the heat. When she had fallen asleep, the cabin had been freezing, the drafts seeping through the floorboards. Now, the space around her felt suffocatingly warm, radiating a heat that felt almost unnatural. Maeve stirred, her heavy eyelids fluttering open. The fire in the hearth had died out entirely, leaving the cabin in pitch blackness, save for the occasional, violent flash of lightning from the storm outside. She shifted, expecting her hand to brush against the coarse, thick fur of the dying wolf. Instead, her fingers grazed something smooth, firm, and undeniably hot. Skin. Maeve froze. Her breath caught in her throat. A heavy muscular arm was draped casually over her waist, pinning her to the floor. The weight of it was immense. As another flash of lightning illuminated the room through the cracks in the shutters, her blood ran entirely cold. The giant black wolf was gone. Lying beside her on the rug, his broad, heavily scarred chest rising and falling with deep, rhythmic breaths, was a man. He was massive, taller, and broader than any lumberjack or knight Maeve had ever seen in Oakhaven. His wild, dark hair fell over a face that was strikingly aristocratic, yet sharply brutal, with a strong jaw covered in dark stubble. Thick, angry red scars crisscrossed his torso, fading rapidly even as she watched. Wrapped securely around his neck, chest, and arms were the very linen bandages Maeve had applied to the wolf hours earlier. Panic seized her. A werewolf. The legends whispered by the elders of Oakhaven were real, but not just any werewolf. His presence radiated an oppressive, dominating aura that made her instincts scream to submit or flee. She tried to slowly, carefully slide out from under his arm. Instantly, his hand shot out, his large fingers wrapping around her wrist like a vice of steel. Maeve gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. The man's eyes snapped open. In the darkness, they glowed a brilliant, terrifying, luminescent gold. In a blur of motion too fast for human eyes to track, he shifted his weight, pinning Maeve flat against the rug. He loomed over her, his powerful legs straddling her hips, his hands pinning both of her wrists above her head. His face was mere inches from hers, his chest heaving, his golden eyes narrowed in deadly suspicion. "Who are you?" His voice was a lethal, gravelly baritone that vibrated through her very bones. "Where's the silver? Where's Briggs?" I took it off," Maeve stammered, terrified but forcing herself to meet his glowing gaze. "The collar. I threw it away. You're in my home. I saved you." The man scrutinized her face, his nose flaring slightly as he took in her scent. A look of profound confusion washed over his harsh features. He leaned closer, his face burying into the crook of her neck. Maeve squeezed her eyes shut, preparing for teeth to tear into her throat. Instead, he simply inhaled deeply, a long, shuddering breath. "Lavender," he murmured, his voice losing a fraction of its hostility. "And rain. You smell of healing herbs. No deception. No silver." He slowly released her wrists and pushed himself back, sitting on his heels. He looked down at the bandages wrapped around his torso, then at the blood-stained water basin and medicinal jars scattered near the hearth. "You bought me," he stated, the realization dawning on him. He remembered the market. He remembered the muddy ground, the silver poisoning his veins, and the fragile human woman who had stepped forward to defy a ruthless trapper for a beast. For $1. "It was all I had," Maeve whispered, pushing herself up into a sitting position, pulling her blanket tightly around her shoulders. "I couldn't let him skin you alive." The man let out a dark, humorless chuckle. "Do you have any idea who you purchased, little healer?" Maeve shook her head, shrinking back slightly. "I am Gideon Vane," he said, the name dropping between them like an anvil. Maeve's breath hitched. Gideon Vane, the Alpha King of the Northern Lichen Packs, the undisputed ruler of the Iron Valley. 3 months ago, rumors had spread through the kingdom that the Alpha King had been betrayed by his own inner circle, poisoned with liquid silver, and slaughtered, leaving his territories in chaotic ruin. "You're supposed to be dead," she breathed. "Many have tried," Gideon replied, his golden eyes flashing with a dangerous, vengeful light. "My beta, a traitor funded by your Lord Harrington, ambushed me. They kept me in wolf form with the cursed silver, intending to parade my pelt through the capital as proof of my demise." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You saved my life, human. A life debt is a sacred bond among my kind. Tell me your name." "Maeve. Maeve Hastings." Before Gideon could speak again, the sharp, unnatural howling of hunting hounds pierced through the noise of the storm outside. Gideon's head snapped toward the heavy oak door, his nostrils flaring. The golden hue in his eyes intensified, glowing brightly in the dark cabin. His muscles coiled tight. "Iron," Gideon growled, his voice dropping into a deadly, monstrous register. "Gunpowder, and a dozen men on horseback." Maeve scrambled to her feet, rushing to the window and peering through a crack in the shutters. In the distance, cutting through the dense forest and the driving rain, was a line of blazing torches. They were moving fast, making a direct line for her cabin. At the front of the hunting party rode Kaelin Briggs, riding side by side with the armored captain of Lord Harrington's royal guard. "Briggs," Maeve whispered, panic rising in her throat. "He didn't just sell you. He figured out what you were, or Harrington tipped him off. They're coming to finish the job." Gideon stood up, towering over her in the confined space of the cabin. Despite having been on the brink of death just hours ago, he radiated immense, lethal power. He reached down, grasping Maeve's hand in his large, hot palm. "They will find nothing but a bloodbath," Gideon said softly, a feral, terrifying smile curving his lips. "Gather your things, Maeve Hastings. You are no longer safe in Oakhaven." Maeve's hands moved, with a practiced, desperate frenzy. She swept her most precious medicinal vials, bundled dried herbs, and her father's brass mortar into a worn leather satchel. Outside, the thunderous galloping of horses and the harsh shouts of men drew closer, echoing over the relentless pounding of the storm. Through the cracks in the wooden walls, the flickering orange glow of torches painted deadly shadows across the cabin floor. Gideon did not look like a man who had spent the last week dying of silver poisoning. He stood by the doorway, his massive frame coiled with lethal tension. as Calen Briggs and Captain Hayes, the notoriously brutal commander of Lord Reginald Harrington's guard, dismounted in the mud outside. Gideon's golden eyes burned with an inner, violent fire. "Surround the perimeter," Hayes barked, his voice cutting through the tempest. "Harrington wants the beast's head. Burn the cabin if the witch refuses to open the door." Maeve slung her satchel over her shoulder, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She looked at Gideon, terrified. "They have flintlocks, the silver bullets. They have nothing," Gideon growled, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, primal resonance. Before Maeve could even scream, the heavy oak door of her cabin splintered inward, kicked off its iron hinges by Captain Hayes. But the captain never even had the chance to raise his weapon. Gideon moved with a speed that defied human comprehension. In a blur of muscle and rage, the Alphaking crossed the room, seizing Hayes by the steel breastplate and hurling him effortlessly backward into the muddy yard. The captain crashed into his own men, scattering them like broken toys. "Run, Maeve. Make for the tree line," Gideon ordered, his body already shifting, muscles expanding and bones cracking with a sickening wet pop. Maeve bolted through the shattered doorway into the freezing rain. Behind her, the screams of men erupted. She didn't look back as she sprinted toward the dense tree line of the Whispering Woods, but the sounds of tearing metal and panicked horses painted a vivid, horrifying picture in her mind. Calen Briggs shrieked in mortal terror before his voice was abruptly silenced by a bone-crushing snap. Within moments, a massive shadow fell over her. The giant midnight black wolf was at her side, his jaws stained crimson, offering a low grunt that commanded her to climb onto his back. Hesitating for only a second, Maeve grasped his thick, coarse fur and pulled herself up. Gideon surged forward, carrying her into the pitch-black abyss of the forest with terrifying speed, leaving the burning remains of her old life behind. They traveled relentlessly for 3 days and nights, crossing the treacherous, jagged borders into the Iron Valley. The terrain grew harsher, the air colder, thick with the scent of pine and ancient magic. Maeve clung to Gideon's back, shielding herself from the biting wind and the warmth of his massive body. But on the evening of the 4th day, Gideon collapsed. He shifted back into his human form as he hit the freezing ground, his skin burning with an unnatural fever. Maeve rushed to his side, her medical instincts overriding her fear. Ripping away his ruined tunic, she saw the horrifying truth. The silver poison from the collar had not been entirely purged. It had sunk deep into his bloodstream, pooling around his heart, glowing with a faint, sickly purple light under his skin. The silver. "It's still inside you," Maeve whispered, her hands trembling as she felt his erratic, failing pulse. "Declan," Gideon choked out, his golden eyes glazed with pain. "My beta. He used a distilled silver serum. Wounds. Heal. Serum. Spreads." Maeve's mind raced. Standard poultices would not work against an alchemical serum. She needed a binding agent, something to draw the heavy metals from his blood before they reached his heart. She tore through her satchel, scattering vials into the snow. She found activated charcoal, dried nightshade, and the rare blood lily petals she had harvested 2 summers ago. "Hold on," she ordered, her voice surprisingly steady. "Gideon, do not close your eyes. You are a king. Act like one." Gideon let out a weak, rattling laugh, his eyes fixing on her fiercely determined face, commanding. "An alpha? Little healer?" She ignored him, using her flint to start a small fire. She boiled snow in a tin cup, crushing the ingredients together in her brass mortar. The mixture turned a foul, sludgy black. Returning to his side, she lifted his head, resting it against her lap. "Drink this. It will feel like swallowing broken glass, but it will bind to the silver." Gideon swallowed the boiling, bitter concoction without a flinch. Almost instantly, his body seized. He roared in agony, his muscles contorting violently as the charcoal and blood lily fought a war against the toxic silver in his veins. Maeve held him down, pressing her hands against his chest, murmuring frantic, soothing words into his ear. She stayed with him through the agonizing night, wiping the cold sweat from his brow, refusing to let the Alphaking slip into the darkness. By dawn, the sickly purple glow beneath his skin had vanished. Gideon's breathing steadied. When he opened his eyes, The fever had broken, and the luminescent gold of his irises was clearer, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous than before. He looked up at Maeve, who was slumped over him, utterly exhausted. Slowly, he reached up, his rough fingers gently brushing a strand of dirty hair from her face. "You have saved my life twice, Maeve Hastings," Gideon murmured, his voice a deep, vibrating rumble of absolute authority and newfound reverence. "The debt can no longer be repaid with simple coin or protection. You are mine to protect now, and I am yours." Maeve looked into his eyes, her heart skipping a beat as the sheer weight of his vow settled over her. The terrifying Alphaking was offering her his loyalty. "We need to take back your throne," she said softly, leaning into his touch. A cruel, predatory smile spread across Gideon's face. "Yes, we are going to slaughter a traitor." The Obsidian Keep, the ancestral seat of the Lichen Kings, was carved directly into the jagged black cliffs of the Iron Valley. It was an impenetrable fortress of dark stone, overlooking a massive, snow-covered courtyard. When Gideon and Maeve emerged from the tree line at the edge of the valley, they did not hide. Gideon walked proudly in his human form, his scars on full display, holding Maeve's hand in a grip of iron. Word of the Alpha's survival had somehow reached the keep before them. The massive iron gates were open, and the entire pack, hundreds of towering, muscular men and women, both in human and wolf forms, had gathered in the courtyard. They stood in stunned, deathly silence, parting like the Red Sea as Gideon strode through their ranks. At the top of the grand stone staircase leading into the keep stood Declan Cross, the traitorous Beta. Declan was a handsome, imposing man, but fear now twisted his features into an ugly snarl. Standing nervously beside Declan was Lord Reginald Harrington himself, flanked by his remaining human guards. The magistrate had clearly come to the keep to finalize his alliance and purchase the Iron Valley's timber rights, thinking the king was dead. "Gideon," Declan called out, his voice wavering slightly before he forced it into a confident boom. "It is a trick. The king is dead. This is a shape-shifting demon sent to divide us." Gideon did not stop walking until he reached the base of the stairs. He released Maeve's hand, stepping forward. "You reek of fear, Declan." Gideon's voice echoed off the black stone walls, powerful and absolute. "And you reek of human corruption. You sold your king to a greedy magistrate for silver and false promises." Harrington panicked, his face draining of color. "Kill him! Declan, you promised me his pelt. Kill the beast!" Declan shifted with a deafening roar, transforming into a massive, heavily scarred gray wolf. He leaped from the top of the stairs, aiming directly for Gideon's throat. But Gideon did not shift. He remained in his human form, a supreme display of dominance and arrogance. As the giant gray wolf descended upon him, Gideon simply stepped into the attack. He caught Declan by the throat mid-air, his human strength vastly overpowering the Beta's beast form. The force of the impact cracked the stone beneath Gideon's boots. With a brutal, effortless twist, Gideon slammed the giant gray wolf into the ground. He drove his knee into Declan's ribs, producing a sickening crack, and buried his hand deep into the thick fur of the traitor's neck. "I am the Alpha of the Iron Valley," Gideon roared, his voice layered with the terrifying, monstrous resonance of his beast, forcing every lichen in the courtyard to drop to their knees in absolute submission. "I am the unbroken bloodline, and you are nothing but a coward." With a final, violent motion, Gideon ended the traitor's life. He dropped the lifeless body onto the cold stone, his chest heaving, his golden eyes sweeping over the kneeling pack. No one dared to breathe. Gideon slowly turned his deadly gaze up the stairs, locking eyes with Lord Reginald Harrington. The magistrate was trembling violently, his guards having already dropped their weapons in terror. "Lord Harrington," Gideon purred, slowly walking up the blood-stained steps. "I believe this woman," he gestured to Maeve, who stood tall at the base of the stairs, "owed you a debt. Tell me, what is the price of her freedom?" Harrington fell to his knees, weeping. "Nothing. She owes nothing. Take the debts. Take the land, please, your majesty, spare me." "You will return to Oakhaven," Gideon commanded, his voice cold and devoid of mercy. "You will strip yourself of your titles, give your wealth to the starving people of your town, and you will never set foot near the Iron Valley again. If I smell your scent on the wind, I will hunt you down and tear you apart myself. Go." Harrington scrambled away, fleeing into the snow like a beaten dog. Gideon turned back to his people. He looked down at the courtyard, at the hundreds of loyal wolves who had been lied to and manipulated. Then, he walked back down the stairs and stood before Maeve. He reached out, taking her trembling hands in his massive, blood-stained ones. Right there, in front of the entire northern pack, the Alpha King dropped to one knee. "You bought a dying beast for a single silver dollar," Gideon said, his voice loud enough for the entire keep to hear, yet incredibly tender. "You healed my wounds, you cleansed my blood, and you gave me the strength to reclaim my home. I offer you my kingdom, Maeve Hastings. Rule by my side as my equal, my Luna, and my queen." Tears stung Maeve's eyes. She looked at the man who had terrified her just days ago, seeing the fierce, unwavering devotion shining in his golden eyes. She squeezed his hands, pulling him up to his feet. "Only if you promise never to put me in a cage," she whispered with a tearful smile. Gideon pulled her into his arms, crushing his lips to hers in a passionate, breath-stealing kiss, as the entire courtyard erupted into a triumphant, deafening howl that shook the very foundations of the world. Maeve risked her last silver dollar for a dying beast, entirely unaware she was purchasing the heart and absolute devotion of the undisputed Alpha King. Her bravery turned a brutal tragedy into an epic romance, proving that the greatest kings bow only to the women fierce enough to heal them. If you loved this dramatic werewolf romance and want more thrilling, edge-of-your-seat storytelling, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more.